welcome to the channel. I'm a bit late on this one, but we are finally talking about Atomic Heart. If you guys are new and seeing my content for the first time, consider subscribing to the channel. I do a lot of gaming reviews and discussions, so if you guys enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like on the video, and like I said, subscribe to the channel. Now, after having rolled the credits on Atomic Heart, I actually found myself really enjoying the game, and I would say I overall had a good experience. The thing here is that almost with everything that I enjoyed about the game, there was a but. Like, I liked this, but I thought this was cool. So I thought it'd be best just to start at the beginning. Atomic Heart is set during the 1950s in an alternate timeline where Russia, Soviet Union had won World War II due to their advancements in robotics because they found this weird substance called polymer, resulting in what looks like a Russian utopia on the outside. You play as a Russian military operative named Sergei, but formerly known as P3 throughout the game. And as they update their new neural network, something goes wrong in the code and it turns all of the robots at this facility into combat mode, killing literally everybody at the complex. And your job is to stop all the robots and find out what happened. And without going into any spoilers, that's pretty much the gist of the story. It's very much like, if any of you guys have seen iRobot, it's very much like iRobot, but kind of in the past, in an alternate timeline kind of thing, if that makes sense. I do think that the story was fairly good and had lots of twists and turns that I personally did not see coming, and was very interesting. It kept me wanting to see what would happen next. I would say that the big letdown with the story, the but that I talked about, which is kind of the big issue I think with the whole game too, is just the dialogue is so bad. I don't know if it was just bad writing or if it was an error in translation, because the studio that made this game is a Russian studio. I don't know what it was, but some of the stuff that your main character says is just flat out cringy or just bad. But Crispy Critters, the dialogue is awful. No joke, that he literally says Crispy Critters 1,001 times. I do have to say that the dialogue in the second half of the game is much better than it is in the first half. It's definitely not great, but it's much more bearable than it is, especially in those first couple hours of the game. The dialogue aside, the actual story of Atomic Heart, the actual meat and potatoes of the game, is actually pretty good, and I thought was really interesting. It's just some of the stuff that your character says in reaction to finding out some of these news, or just to himself or to his glove. It's just oh, it's not good. And there's no way to tone down just his chatter either. Too many Crispy Critters, man. One of the other aspects that I really enjoyed about Atomic Heart was the gameplay. Right off the bat, I thought that the guns were all really good. I felt that they all felt good to shoot. The reload animations were all really cool. I really liked some of the electric-based weapons. Those were all really fun to use as well. The gunplay in here I thought was pretty solid. You can also attach these mods. At least, I can't remember if they're called mods or not, but you attach them to the weapon and they'll deal elemental damage as well. There's fire, ice, and electricity that you can equip to the side of your gun, and now your bullets will do fire damage as you're shooting, or do electric damage. Another part of the gameplay that I really loved was your glove, Charles, which is the thing that you talk to. Along with Charles, you get a whole host of abilities, one of those being this ability called Shock, which is where you could throw electricity, and you can upgrade all of these different abilities, so where you can shock multiple enemies at once, stun multiple enemies. You also have another slot that you can swap out some of your other abilities. You can't swap out the shocks you always use, but you could swap out a bunch in your secondary slot with abilities like freeze. Pretty self-explanatory, freeze enemies. My personal favorite was, I believe it was called mass telekinesis, which allows you to pick up a bunch of enemies, and once you upgrade enough, you can slam them down, doing a ton of damage, or you can just hold them up in the air and then whip out your gun and just start shooting them as they're up in the air. One of the other abilities you could do is this thing called polymer jet, which you could spray this gray polymer stuff onto enemies, and so when you hit them with elemental damage, like some of the guns that had fire and electricity bullets, it'll deal extra damage to those enemies that you sprayed with the polymer. And if I'm being honest, I ended up using those quite a bit, the jet and the mass telekinesis, One of the things that I feel that Atomic Heart does really well is that out of all these different abilities that you have, they let you freely swap between them too, where if you put a bunch of stats into freeze and you decide that you don't like freeze anymore, you can literally get rid of all of those points. You can respec for free, basically, and take all of those points and add them into something else. So they give you a lot of freedom to experiment with what you like, which I really enjoyed. Something that I thought was really cool, and that gives you a lot of freedom to play around and experiment with what you like the most. One of the other features that the glove allows you to do is kind of auto loot, if that's what it's called. Basically, you hold up your glove as you're going through these rooms. There's cabinets and closets and desks, and you just hold the button, and you can just auto pick up all of the loot as long as you're aiming at it. And I actually thought that was really fun. I actually never got tired of it. It was just a fun way to make looting more interesting, because I feel like looting in general is not super interesting. You're just going through and you're just looking, opening drawers and things like that. It's not super interesting, but instead of doing each and every one individually, you could just mass suck everything in, and I don't know, I liked it. Now those are the things that I really enjoyed: the gunplay, the glove. Now here comes the butt with the gameplay. Is the melee combat was just not very good. At least I personally didn't like it very much at all. I personally just didn't think it was super fun. All of the animations just felt really slow. Like, I just felt like I was moving at the speed of molasses trying to take out some of these robots. And it also didn't even really matter how much damage some of these melee weapons did. Even if it said it did a lot, it just didn't feel worth it because you moved so slow. And especially when you're being swarmed by multiple enemies, multiple robots. They all looked cool, don't get me wrong. All of the melee weapons I thought looked freaking awesome. I just wish that they would do more damage, or that you can swing them a little bit faster, things like that. It's just, I don't know, the melee combat here was just not good, especially compared to your glove abilities and the gunplay. Like, those were just superior. I hardly ever used my melee weapon. The only time that I really actually whipped it out is when I was low on ammo and I didn't want to waste it, and I was like, okay, this robot's got a couple hits left, let me go and smack it around a little bit. I will say though, one nice touch with the melee weapons is that whenever you did use it, I thought it was nice that you can see like physical damage to the robots that you're attacking. Like, you could see arms break off, slashes go across their chest, so it was kind of cool to see those, but it just wasn't enough to actually use those as a main weapon. Last thing I do want to say about the weapons is that I felt like the game introduced you new weapons and new upgrades at a pretty good pace. There was never a time where I'm like, I'm getting real tired of this weapon, I want to try to find something else, or I went long periods without finding anything. One of the other things I think Atomic Heart does actually pretty well is that they have a vast variety of enemies. You have your standard enemies, which are like those crash test mustache looking things, to where you have like these giant freaking robots that remind me of Big Weld from that Robots movie, or an armored Baymax. Like, they have several different enemy types. They have robots that are healing other robots. Like, there's just a lot of variety here. As we're on the topic with enemies, one of the things that I feel Atomic Heart does well is the boss fights. And Atomic Heart freaking delivers on some of those boss fights. They are so good. They were all so epic and crazy. And almost every single boss fight you came across were like vastly different. They're all unique. They all had certain ways to be taken down. You had to use certain weapons. It was awesome. On top of just how epic the bosses were, the freaking music here was so dang good. It was the same, I forget his name, I'm drawing a blank on it, but it was the same guy that did the music for the Doom and Doom Eternal games. Like, this was just like heavy rock, and it was just like headbanging awesomeness. It was so good. Like, that same energy that he brought to those Doom games, he brought to Atomic Heart, which made those boss fights even more fantastic than they already were. Now, the only thing that I would say I didn't like per se, it wasn't necessarily the bosses, but it was a boss in general. And anyone who's played Atomic Heart knows exactly what boss I'm talking about. It's a freaking BS boss. First of all, this boss looks like it was something ripped straight out of Bloodborne. It's all bloody, and it looks like it's just a big humanoid thing full of veins and just blood squirting everywhere. I mean, it looks cool, don't get me wrong, but this thing is stupidly hard to take out. After figuring out what its weakness is after a couple tries, it was weak to fire, and even after lighting it on fire and putting like 9 freaking rocket shells into it, it still took me a good chunk to get it down. Your standard weapons like your AKs, your guns, your electric things, they just don't do any damage. So if you didn't go in there with a couple of rocket launchers, you were just screwed. Because every other time I tried to fight this boss and I didn't have a bunch of rockets on hand, it took me forever. And that was like combining the polymer to make it to do more damage with the rocket so he'd catch on fire. I felt like every time I encountered this boss, because here's the kicker, you do encounter this boss several times throughout the game, and I feel like every single time you encountered it, I was just not prepared for this boss whatsoever. I had no rockets, I had no fire clips, I had nothing. Like, I don't know why, but this boss was just 10 times harder than anything else in the whole game. Like, I beat pretty much every single boss first try. Like, the game itself wasn't necessarily hard, but this boss was like that's why I said it was ripped straight out of Bloodborne, because it was way difficult. But outside of that boss, that's the butt part. Outside of that boss, all the other bosses were awesome. I mean, even this boss looked awesome. It just wasn't very fun to fight because he was crazy hard. But bosses overall were freaking fire. Up next, I want to talk a little bit about the world of Atomic Heart. The world that this story takes place in is absolutely incredible. I loved the visuals here. I loved seeing the Russian twist on their futuristic utopia. Like, it all just looked super beautiful, and I was just in awe. I loved looking at all of the robot designs. Out of all of the things I feel Atomic Heart doesn't do quite well, the art department is one thing that delivers 110% of the time. The art department understood the assignment. As far as the open world aspects go, I'm kind of divided on it, because you have like your open world sections, and then you also have like your underground dungeon, like corridor type places, which for 99% of the time is your main missions, and the open world is just for exploration. My problem with the open world is, as cool and beautiful as it looks, it is just flooded with enemies. I feel like every time you went out, there's cameras everywhere. And in this game, if you're in range of a camera, if a camera sees you, it automatically will send all of the robots to your location. And so there'll be a time where I'm fighting, 2 or 3 robots, but I didn't notice the camera, and next thing I know, I'm fighting wave after wave, and I just felt like there's too many enemies, or at least too many cameras. And so after a while, I just started running past all of these enemies. All of like the story related stuff, like underground and the dungeon corridor type areas, all super fun, super great. They had a lot of like shortcuts that got you back to a front, things like that, connecting hallways. I actually really enjoyed all of the story-based missions. The map absolutely sucks. It's so trash. First of all, it just shows what it looks like. You can't place map markers or anything, and so there are so many times where I'm trying to explore other sectors within the map, and I kept having to pull it up just to see if I'm going in the right direction. It wasn't really any help at all. So like, you couldn't put any markers to like know how far away or which direction to go. I talked about this a little bit earlier, but the last thing I want to mention is the game's performance. Now, I played Atomic Heart on the PlayStation 5. I do believe it is on Xbox Game Pass for the Series X and Series S. And for the most part on the PS5, I felt like the game ran great with very little glitches and bugs. There were a couple throughout the game, I feel like sprinkled here and there, but it wasn't enough to like really negatively impact the game. Especially in those early hours, I did quite get some frame drops. It almost seemed like it was more of like the enemies. Like, some of the enemies were running really fast and they were very choppy. Like, they're almost running too fast. But all the boss fights ran great. I didn't have any crashes or game-breaking bugs. Although there were a couple times that, especially in the open world, that I would try to jump over something, and I would almost get like stuck hovering over the top. I would get stuck between a car and a guardrail, or there was like a plank of wood up against a wall, and I tried to jump over it, and I got stuck in between. It was kind of weird, and there was no solution for it, because you would just be stuck. I could move around, I could shoot, I could look any other way, I just couldn't get out. And so the only way to fix it was to restart the game. That only happened a couple times. And if I'm remembering right, a lot of these issues were very much front-loaded in the game, like that front half of the game. I didn't remember running into too many in the later half of the game. A lot of it was in that first couple hours of the game, which is kind of unfortunate, because that's where most people are going to play. Like, if someone's unsure about this game or on the fence, they're not going to play through the whole game. They're going to quit in those first couple hours. I don't think that a lot of these issues were that game-breaking and didn't pull me out of the game, but I thought it happened frequently enough that it's worth a mention. Moving on to my final thoughts on Atomic Heart. Despite all of Atomic Heart's flaws, I ended up really enjoying this game. The art direction was incredible. The boss battles were so much fun and so epic. Like I said, coupled with that music, like they were just the highlight of the game for me. And personally, I actually really enjoyed the story, had a couple twists and turns that I didn't see coming, and outside of that dialogue, the actual like core story elements were really good. And that is why I'm going to give Atomic Heart an 8 out of 10. Atomic Heart is by no means a perfect game and definitely has its flaws, but for me personally, I think if you guys are on the fence about it, it is definitely worth a playthrough. Like I said earlier, it is available on Xbox Game Pass, so if you're kind of strapped for funds, that is a cheap way to play it if you have an Xbox Series X or S. And also, I believe this is like an indie developer. This is their very first game, and for their very first game being how it is, it's actually not a bad game at all. Like, they actually did really well. I'm excited for whatever Mundfish does next. They have announced that there are some DLCs in the works, so I'll be looking forward to those. But that's going to be it for the video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, made it this far, leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll catch you guys on the next video.